There's new reporting just coming into the Situation Room right now. We've learned that the Trump administration had private negotiations with China, warning officials there against retaliatory tariffs. But those behind-the-scenes talks evidently did not work. CNN's chief national affairs correspondent Jeff Zeleny is over at the White House watching all of this for us. Jeff, what's the reaction over there after those warnings apparently fell on deaf ears?
Well, if they did fall on deaf ears, but it's just the latest example in the really day by day, the deepening trade war that is underway between the United States and China. Yes, we are learning that U.S. officials privately behind the scenes urged China to not retaliate. In fact, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been saying that publicly all along, warning countries to not retaliate. Well, those warnings have fallen on deaf ears, particularly with China, as they raise their tariffs to 125%. The question now is which side is going to blink, if either. And Matt was just talking about consumer confidence. The prices are going to go up. There's no question about it. That's what the White House is bracing for. That's what the administration is bracing for. It's one of the big reasons the president had a dramatic pullback on a sweeping tariff plan just a couple days ago. And the market, of course, reacted very well in the moment. But in a couple days since, it certainly has not. The bond market also has not strengthening. So this is going to be one of the central questions here. But Wolf, we are also learning just inside the White House, the president, as he embarks on this 3-month pause on a sweeping tariff plan, there's competing views from his team of economic rivals, if you will. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, a long history on Wall Street, he is one of the people the president is listening to the most on this, of course. Kevin Hassett is as well. But Peter Navarro, the man right in the middle of the screen there, he is someone who has been very pro-supportive of these tariffs, and the president did not heed his advice this week. So as the president goes forward on this, as the consumer sentiment prices rise, which advisor is going to sort of win out on this? So there's no doubt the president at the center of all these new trade negotiations now has to negotiate with some 90 countries or so. So, Wolf, all of this is coming front and center here is the economy. That inflation report, the rising inflation, is one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest worries for this administration.
I do want to bring in CNN's Kylie Atwood. She has some new reporting on how President Trump in the U.S., the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, have interacted, and I guess the best way to say it, have not interacted, Kylie, since this trade war began. And you have some great new reporting on why that is.
Dana, just hours before these new retaliatory tariffs came out from China this morning, the Trump administration had privately warned Chinese officials of two things. First of all, not to retaliate, which we heard from Trump time and time again over the last few weeks, but also that China should be requesting a phone call between President Trump and President Xi. China has not done that so far. They've been telling China to do this for months now, according to a source familiar with that working level dialogue between the two sides. We know that Xi and Trump spoke before inauguration. They haven't had a conversation as this trade war has escalated. And senior White House officials tell Elena Trine that Trump is waiting for Xi to make the first move here. He thinks the onus is on the Chinese leader to do so. But when you talk to folks, there's a fundamental disagreement about how this could all come together. And that is one of the challenges, as there is this remaining question, an urgent question really, as to how they're going to create an off-ramp for this escalating trade war.
Here is where the trade war stands right now. 145 going up against 125. These are the tariffs between the world's two biggest economies.
And here's another number, 4,700 or about $400 per month. That is how much more money Yale's now estimating, the Yale Budget Lab, that President Trump's tariffs are going to cost average households each year. And with just hours left in trading, the Dow right now up. You're seeing that swing here going into the afternoon, up almost 650 points. But it was up and down there throughout earlier in the day. With us now, we have CNN business editor-at-large Richard Quest. We have CNN chief national security analyst Jim Sciutto as well. Richard, a key economic gauge, the consumer sentiment now at its second lowest level on record, going back to 1952. Why?
We shouldn't be surprised with all that's coming out and all the worries about tariffs It's not just that, it's the complexity of everything else as well. The changes within the federal government, the worries about job losses, the worries about a slowing economy, higher inflation, and eventually you get these what's known as soft data. They're surveys like the Michigan survey, consumer sentiment, and it's a really worrying number because at some point these sentiment surveys feed into hard data of real consumer spending. And we know this from history and precedent. That's what happens. So when we see a number as bad as this one, it is only a matter of time, unless anything else changes that would suddenly make people more cheerful. Look at that chart. I mean, just look at it. Unless people suddenly become more cheerful, why would this not translate into spending? You see, that consumer lab, the lab from Yale, that number of 4,700, that is providing you don't start substituting goods. In other words, pre-substitution, if we just continue as we are now. But of course, people will start to substitute. They will find other goods. And as the Christmas Tree Association said a moment or two ago, it's going to be very difficult to find substitution of many things that we currently get from China.
Yeah, you'll be surprised just how much we get exclusively from China. And Jim, I'm really curious to get your perspective on the White House's handling of this situation. Not so much the tariffs that have been announced, but this reporting that the White House, that officials have made clear to Beijing that they want Xi to ask for a call with Trump. Yeah. Trump hasn't reached out directly. What do you make of that approach?
And the White House saying they want Xi to reach out for it. Can you get any more high school in matters of state? It's ridiculous. He's got to
call me, Jim.
Yeah, and listen, what's interesting is, as I was reporting yesterday, the Chinese impression is that they are willing to at least negotiate, not necessarily on Donald Trump's terms, but to talk. But their impression is that the U.S. has not opened channels and not made an effort to open up channels to allow that. So now you have the U.S. president say, well, I'm not going to open those channels. China has to open them first. It's kind of ridiculous at the end of the day because you are playing with the interests of American consumers, Chinese consumers, et cetera. The other point I would make about China's reaction today in not quite meeting the U.S. tariffs, 145% U.S., China goes to 125. And in Xi's statement, he says, we're going to 125 in response. That's as high as we're going because this is getting a little ridiculous, right? And that's both a signal to say we're not going to get caught up in this tit for tat to the degree that the president is, but it's also an opening to say, okay, we're capping this for now, and that perhaps offers a way forward that we could begin talking about how to bring these down.
You've lived in China. You've covered China for some time now. As we're looking at this question of who's going to blink first, with two very different political systems, what is your gauge on this?
Well, different systems, listen, one's a democracy, one is not. One's a single-party state, very much not a democracy. But China does have politics, and Chinese leaders do not want to be seen, we were talking about this yesterday, I believe, do not want to be seen as capitulating to America. That is not good politics for a Chinese leader. Long colonial history to go back into, we could talk for hours, but they don't want to be seen as kowtowing to the West here. So the browbeating is not a great diplomatic strategy. And we've seen that in the past as well. Now, we should say Donald Trump mixes in with the tariff browbeating some comments about how good a friend he is with Xi. But we'll see if the door has been closed for now or if there's a little bit of an opening and perhaps they start opening those channels.
Richard, it's interesting to explore the power that the EU has now because they can tip the scales in terms of how impactful these tariffs will be for either nation, depending on where negotiations land.
So you've got the Spanish Prime Minister in Beijing. You've got the EU basically saying, well, we're going to start looking at other markets. I think this will most certainly give a huge boost to China-EU relations to try and complete some form of trade agreement because everybody is now wanting to circumnavigate the United States. Now, you can't up to a point. There are certain things, there are certain inalienable bonds of trade between the EU and the US. That doesn't mean to say you can't reduce it, your reliance. And just as much as the US is now saying, we want to reduce our reliance on China, we want to make sure we are no longer strategically dependent. The EU absolutely is saying, is there a deal to be done with Brazil and Mercosur? Is there a deal to be done with ASEAN, a stronger one? Jim, can I just ask Jim, do you think, sorry guys, but do you think that the Xi statement is actually a sort of not a white flag, but just a sort of an olive branch that both sides can now take to move forward?
I think it has two sides to it. One, it's a bit of a message to the U.S. to say, this is silly. This is getting silly. We're not going to play this game of chicken. But Xi Jinping, also by not going right up to the level of U.S. tariffs, I think one can look at that as a small opening for discussions. Both of them want to talk. Now the question is, I suppose, who picks up the phone first? That's where we are.
You see, Boris, Brianna, that's what happens when you get two anchors who are also your guests. We'll just hijack the whole thing.
He did it, by the way, just so you know. I only answered.
No objections here over who calls who first or who asks what question.
friends.
It's a fun conversation, and we appreciate it. Richard Quest, Jim Sciutto, thank you both.